why the need seemingly for the president to allay any form of concern in South Africa's participation in BRICS, since we've been a member of what is essentially an economic bloc of emerging economic nations soon after its formation in 2009? Why did I get a sense of the president seemingly trying to sell to South Africans that we are a member of BRICS, seeing that we've been participating for more than a decade now?
Yes, indeed. And we are also a member of the G20. Let's not forget this. Maybe it is what recently Minister Pandor for our international relations has been stressing, that this is not, the BRICS do not want to be an anti-Western alliance. They do put certain interests, certain trading interests first, which are South trading interests. Yes, they promote very strongly collaboration with China, which America and the EU are viewing as a new threat to a future world. And yes, we cannot gloss over the big differences. The West have basically declared war on Russia, at least economic war, and the BRICS countries have refused to be part of that. And that is a conflict.
Quite interesting was the reiteration of South Africa's international stance and the distinction between non-alignment and neutrality, but at the same time, still stressing issues where it is concerned, particularly with Russia's incursion in Russia. He spoke about concerns of children, Ukrainian children affected by war. He spoke about prisoners of war, particularly Ukrainian prisoners of war, but also grain access from the Black Sea. How does he draw this distinction of non-alignment, neutrality, but also speaking out when it is affecting a human rights aspect of this conflict and how it's affecting Africans and South Africa?
Well, definitely a difficult balancing act. And President Lula has just yesterday in our Sunday Times declared that he thinks President Putin should be able to attend in person, and basically criticizing South Africa for not having showed its muscle, for not having showed the finger to the International Criminal Court. So South Africa is really trying to stay clear of taking sides. Russia will not be pleased at Ramaphosa's taking sides on the orphan or on the children issue. Russia maintains that children were removed from cities that were under constant bombardment to keep them safe, and that obviously they will go back to their parents once the bombing stops, once the war stops. Ramaphosa takes a slightly different view, thinking they should be going back now. The grain deal, Russia says they're not stopping any grain from leaving as long as Russian fertilizers can also leave, because without that fertilizer, all the crops, and especially Africa, will fail in the next year. So South Africa is sober. I think that's what we can take away from yesterday evening. Especially Minister Pandor has a very rational, calming approach to current world affairs. He says, let's get back to business. Let's stop the ideological posturing and threatening. Let's stop threatening each other with terrible consequences, including warning of a nuclear exchange, over what started as a language conflict, as a very small issue of cultural rights and language rights, whether a Russian minority in eastern Ukraine can have their own schools and their own representation. This has been blown out of all proportions, and an enormous amount of world GDP is going into rearmament. We have a new arms race when we were all hoping that all these resources could go into fighting global warming and into fighting poverty in the South.
It's a binary world that we live in, whether we like it or not, but it's a unique position for South Africa. We're hosting the BRICS Head of State Summit. We're participating in economic instruments and tools that is away from the Western consensus, but at the same time, we're hosting a US Africa Goa Summit later this year. South Africa assumes the presidency of the G20 group of nations in 2025. This is a very interesting, almost non-binary, 2 feet in two different worlds type of context that South Africa finds itself in at the moment.
Well, Secretary General of the United Nations, who's attending this BRICS summit, warned a few months back that we shouldn't go down the road of dividing the world again into East and West, building a new wall, a new Iron Curtain. Instead, everybody was hoping globalization, free trade, participation in development, and solving the big issues. I think there is a lot of competitiveness between America and China, which is coming up. The West and America are not pleased to see that it is China that has reduced carbon emissions by 34% in the last 10 years, outperforming the West by far. Today, all solar energy is Chinese energy. They virtually have a monopoly worldwide on the production of solar panels, and they're moving ahead with enormous strides on electrically powered transport. So there is a competition. Let us hope that this competition does not result in erecting new borders and nationalisms.
Professor André Thomashausen, Professor Emeritus of International Law at UNISA.